So, welcome to this session. I feel kind of alone up here. So, if anybody wants to join me, you're welcome. But I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy for all of you being here. It feels really nice. I know a lot of you, some of you I don't know, but it just feels very nice to know that it's a group of believers and that we're all learning together. I have a PowerPoint. It's new to me, so I don't have a lot on there, but I have some of my main points. But I also have a picture of my family. I always like that when the speaker, it feels like there's maybe a little more connection. And am I talking too loud? Am I loud? The one thing that I wanted to do with my family is just mention a couple of things that I am learning as a mom of adult daughters, and then our youngest is 13. So, kind of balancing that, but just things, everyday things, or maybe bigger things too, that they're just showing me. So just a little bit, I'll introduce my family. So at the middle picture, we have 4 daughters. And the one on the far right is Kara, and then Allison, Elena, and Jess. Lainey got married this past August, and this is her husband, Judd. They live in South Carolina in his hometown. And then my husband, Gene. Probably most of you have seen him around this weekend. So some of the things that I am learning and just kind of maybe been reminded of, or just one of the simple things is that a sunset is worth leaving the table right in the middle of a meal to go see the sun drop behind the horizon, and how much prettier the colors are when you're sitting out there in the grass by a lake than sitting at our dinner table just looking out the window. So that's one of the things. And then also seeing the beauty of a confidential friend and just the trust that builds among friends, and seeing that played out. Another one is not worrying, letting things roll off. And you probably know that's my youngest, and she's 13, so that does work for her too. But it still is a good thing for me to think about when I worry too much. The camaraderie of someone coming alongside when we're doing something hard, and them just grinding it out with us. And then also the love and care for the soul. And that's my husband. He does such a good job of that, caring for our hearts. So some of these things come out of fun and, connectedness, togetherness as a family. Some things come out of kind of messy places and hard places in our relationships. So I say these things, and it's not all out of just easy life happening. So we're going to move into the session, and you may have noticed in the program it was pausing to listen. So I've just titled it, it's a very simple title of Listening to God and to Each Other. So this is something, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on into my talk, but it's a personal thing for me. It's been a personal journey. And the committee here very kindly said they'll pick a subject for me, or I can choose it. And this was something that I actually have been reading and studying on just because of some hard places in my life. And so when they said that, I took them up on it. And so it's something that's kind of dear to me. And I know that God has taught me a lot through it, but I hope it's something that you can hear and be challenged by as well. So in truly listening to God, we will grow in our ability to listen to each other. David says in Psalm 66:19, "But God has truly listened and attended to the voice of my prayer." In Jeremiah 33:3, it says, "Call to me, and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." So as I was looking at these scriptures, I noticed God being both speaker and listener. And that's what we are. We're on both ends. We also see Jesus modeling listening beautifully. He listened to the cries of the blind, questions of his disciples, the pain of the broken, but just like a lot of needs in humanity. So since listening to and hearing God are essential to relationship with him, it's really important for us to follow his example and listen to him, but also listen to each other. The very thought that the God who created the universe and he rules nations, he rules the kings of those nations, nothing happens out of his control, that same God wants to be in communication with us is just really incredible. And it's kind of, he wants to listen to us, but he also wants to be listened to by us in his words. So that's kind of beyond my understanding. So as we engage in our world, which we all know must be one of the loudest in history, let's not be too distracted to take time for something that's precious, that's becoming rare, and that's the ability to listen. So this evening, I'll share some things that I've learned and some things that I've just maybe knew but was shown in a different light, and some things just kind of been reminded of through the study of listening. There's also some things that I won't share that I first thought I would, and it comes through the words of a wise friend of mine that told me, so I'm kind of new to this, but she told me, she said, some things, it's more for you and for your, lessons for me. It's not to share with everyone. So in that, I trust God's timing and his wisdom. I have a long way to go in becoming a good listener, but especially to the people closest to me. So the subject of listening to God is a really broad subject. So when I was thinking about the subject, I thought, how interesting would that be to just go around the room and hear all of the ways that you connect and you hear from God and you communicate. I think that's the beauty and the uniqueness of how God made us, and we all communicate in our own ways and with him. There are so many verses in the Bible, roughly 1,300, that talk about listening or hearing from God. How to listen, or to listen, but then how to listen. There's examples of people who listened to God. Really, they followed exactly what he said. There are also ones that didn't, and he shows us those examples too. So when I started this study, the number of resources through books and podcasts, it's a lot on hearing God, and it can be overwhelming. But so I just have kind of a small part of listening to God that I'm going to be speaking on tonight. And it's these are three postures of the heart: a rested heart, a purposeful heart, and an obedient heart. So with a rested heart, Isaiah 30:15 says, "In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength." So the word rest is what I was looking up, but when I read this verse, the word return kind of stuck out to me as well. And the definition of return is to come or go back to a place or a person. So there's so many things in the world that draw our attention away from God in a day's time. And it's not a new problem. It's been this way since Adam and Eve and the fall. So each one of us has to make the decision every day, moment by moment, to focus, draw our minds back to God, and to not let his voice be crowded out by all the noise and distractions. To invite him in to whatever's going on. If we're happy, or if we're excited, or if we're overwhelmed, just to invite him into those moments and then listen. Pause and listen. He might be silent with us, and just enjoy our company, or he might have something to say to us. We can quiet our hearts in the middle of noise, and so I think, so probably for all of you that have young children now, presently, and for the ones of us that have ever had children, we've learned how to block out noise, right? So breathe deep, and focus on, discipline our minds to be quiet and listen. God can speak in the middle of all that chaos and noise, even in our world. Like when we're in, so we've learned to do that with our children, but even he can block out that noise in the world as well. In this study, I found myself needing to return and rest so many times. There were so many resources, so many thoughts going on in my head. And then there was the anxiety about y'all, the audience, my inabilities. Often in my overwhelmed state, I'd ask God what he wants. And over, he would say the words to me, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled." And I could rest. His voice is so comforting. Since most of listening is about relationship, could it be that what God loves most and desires most about us listening to him and him listening to us is the relationship? In quietness and rest shall be your strength. Okay, so the second one has a purposeful heart. Solomon in Proverbs 2, 1 and 2, and verses 5 and 6, he says, "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding." So I'm going to stop there a minute. There's 4 words in there that speak of heart posture. He says, accept, store up, turning, and applying. So those 4 words speak of a heart posture. And then in verse 5 and 6, it shows the benefits of that heart posture when it says, "Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." So when we hear God's voice, do we take it in the moment, but get sidetracked and forget? Remembering his words to us and following through are part of living with a purposeful heart. The Hebrew word Shema is used interchangeably in the Bible when it talks about listening or hearing. So the same word is used for those 2 words. And And the meaning of that word is physically listening with our ears with the expectation to act on it. So it's an action. It's listening, but also acting. The same is true with listening to others. Active listening requires listening to what is said with our ears and with our hearts. It requires purposeful discipline to stay focused on the listener and not on ourselves. The purposeful heart is also listening to God with a heart that's willing to learn, to change, and to become. So we ask and listen. We can ask God questions like, what are the distractions that stand in the way of my hearing you? Am I staying too busy with things that are good but are hindering me from hearing your voice? And with leadership, some of those things can be expectations of roles that I need to fill, people to interact with. And then even with our family, we can think of things that my children and my family need from me. And maybe it's not always them needing things. It's maybe more needing to be needed. There are also fears that inhibit us and make it hard for us to hear God. So the last one I have is an obedient heart. Listening is an act of love and obedience. In John 10:27, Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." Following here means taking God's word to heart and listening to his voice. An obedient heart is a surrendered heart, choosing to align our will with his in whatever he asks us. Okay, so I referred earlier to the fact that I haven't always listened well. And it's through this personal journey that this topic came to be. But in the process of studying, I started second guessing and asked God if there isn't something else maybe that I can talk about. Because it seemed pretty certain that since all of you are in leadership roles of some kind or at some level, that you're probably pretty good at this. And so it's part of our privilege and calling as pastors and wives to listen to people's stories. And so it would make sense that we are all good at this. And I would think, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one that needs this. But he didn't really give me peace about dropping it. And instead, I felt him saying, just trust me and dig in. So, we all have, or probably we all have, aha moments where the light bulb comes on and we suddenly see things clearly and we wonder why we didn't see it sooner. It's very inspiring, usually. So I had a similar moment, but it was a little more of a, oh boy. And there was kind of a level of sadness that I couldn't really shake. And I started realizing I was hearing a frustration from my family over my lack of listening skills. They were gentle and kind about it, but it was things like, well, Mom, I know you were listening, but you seemed pretty distracted and like maybe you weren't really hearing me. Or Gene would ask me if I remembered something we talked about, and I would say we hadn't talked about it. He never told me. And bit by bit, I would remember that he did tell me. And unfortunately, the list goes on. And so the sad thing is maybe arrogance, I'm not quite sure what it was, but made me think that it was everybody else's problem. I'm a busy mom, and I'm a wife, and I'm all of these things, I can't do everything. But it was a kind of a specific day and time. And I remember I was driving somewhere, and God just put his finger on it and said, no, it's actually your problem. And you need to take responsibility and for that, but also the harm that it's caused. And that's where the level of sadness came in, because those things we can't redo. And so, in those moments, God is faithful. And he also told me it's not just affecting my family either. It affects people around me. So I promptly bought a book and started reading. Too often I want change in my life, but I'm not willing to be honest enough with myself and not listening well enough to those around me to recognize what that change needs to look like. Or sometimes I'm not willing to put in the work, and my attention is diverted to something usually less hard. Because listening is work. It actually is. It's an investment. And it's momentarily suspending my needs to care about and focus on another person. A quote by Bryant H. McGill says, one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. Solomon says in Proverbs 1:5, let the wise listen and add to their learning. And David says in Psalm 18:66, he heard my cry from his sanctuary. He heard me from his sanctuary. My cry reached his ears. So if Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, says we can learn from listening, and David says that God is listening and hears our cry, what does that actually say to us about the value of listening? So I'm going to go on into listening to each other. So I have 3 points: why it is important to listen to each other, barriers to good listening, and ways to be an active listener. So why is it important for us to listen to each other? The first one I have is understanding others and being understood. Michael Nichols, in his book, The Lost Art of Listening, says, "Few motives in human experience are as powerful as the yearning to be understood." And by the way, that's the book that I bought. And it's good for the most part. The gift of being listened to gives us the confidence that we are valued and that what we have to say matters. My hope is that all of us have someone, or maybe several people, that truly listen to us. And if we are, it's a gift, and we're probably in the minority because a lot of people don't have that. It's been said, speech is the primary means of relating, and being listened to is the primary means of being understood and appreciated. It hurts to not be listened to. Most likely, we can all think of conversations that we've had that we didn't feel heard or understood. We know how frustrating it can be when we're in a conversation with someone and we're sharing an experience that happened to us or something experience that we had, and the other person, often in an attempt to make us feel understood, will tell a like story. But somehow the conversation never comes back around, and we never get to finish our story. So I've also been on the other end. So I know it's part of life and how we do sometimes. But I've been on the end where it does feel frustrating. The truth is, even with good intentions, we still have to be conscious and purposeful to be other-focused. As I mentioned before, active listening requires suspending our own needs and focusing on the other person. So the second one I have is it improves relationships and shows value. Finding a balance between talking and listening to the people between us and the people we're talking to or in conversation with, to find a good balance so that we can interact as equals is a very, it's a little bit of a balancing act to try to, talk and listen and to balance that out. Listening and being listened to are critical in helping to create healthy relationships. Teaching children to listen to others and to wait their turn to talk gives them good life skills in listening. I don't know if I ever really thought about that when mine were young, but it really does. And also a listened to child will often become a good listener themselves. A caring listener can create a feeling of safety for the speaker by paying attention and showing appreciation for what the person has to say. Being listened to can also be the difference between feeling accepted and feeling isolated. We probably all have people we call or text when something significant happens in our lives or something funny happens. We'll send pictures or memes. We're made to stay connected. Listening also brings confidence. We've probably all seen it in a child when he's excited about telling a story and he starts out full of confidence and enthusiasm until he realizes no one is listening. And suddenly his demeanor changes, and normally one of two things happens. He either becomes loud and sometimes demands to be heard, or he withdraws and retreats. We as adults really aren't so different. We never outgrow our desire to be valued through being listened to. To be sure, as adults, we understand that sometimes in conversations, these things happen. we get interrupted and talked over and no one is listening, or we can get caught up in conversation and interrupt others as well. It's good if we can extend grace in those times and not get our feelings too involved. But at the same time, sometimes, for me personally, sometimes it's just good to acknowledge those feelings to God and to myself and then choose to let them go. So what's the best thing to do if someone like habitually interrupts or talks over us? Or kind of changes, listens but changes the subject repeatedly. Acknowledging it to the person in a kind tone, maybe not in the heat of the moment, may be a kindness to them. Maybe they don't realize it, and they'd be glad to know, and maybe not. If we say something to the person, it's always good to bring attention to the action and not make it a personal attack. Something like, I wasn't quite done with my thought. I'd like just a minute to finish. Or, hey, this subject sounds interesting, but can I just wrap up my thought first? Or a simple, shut up, I'm talking. Can be effective. Listen to understand, listen to show value. It's easy to want to rush conversations and find a solution for the other person, but be patient. A good listener appreciates us as we are. So it also shows empathy. It's easy to assume empathy comes naturally to us in all situations, and it would be nice if it would. But most times it takes a deliberate effort to understand what the other person may be feeling. The definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So with that in mind, there are some people and some situations that we can just connect with, and we understand, and we feel empathy towards them maybe more naturally. But in others, it may not come as easy, particularly where the connection is not as natural or our needs come in the way. We have to dig a little deeper to understand and show empathy. Before I was pregnant with our oldest daughter, Jean and I went through several years of infertility, and it's a little bit painful for me to look back and realize how little empathy I felt sometimes towards my friends who were maybe overwhelmed with young toddlers. It was hard for me to suspend that pain and sadness and of what I was dealing with and show empathy to them. And some days I wish I could go do that over again. But sometimes it's easy to kind of get lost in what we're dealing with. Also things like repetition. Hearing the same story over again can make it hard to listen and show empathy. Sometimes I imagine how Jesus would listen, and I imagine he would shift his focus from what he wants, from his wishes, to the speaker's wishes. He'd probably pull his chair a little closer, and he'd say, "This is the best story. Please tell it to me again." If we can focus on the pleasure it gives the speaker to tell the story, it gives us more patience and grace to hear it again. And let's face it, most of us will probably be repeating ourselves at some point in life, if not sooner than later, so let's be nice. Another area it can be difficult to show empathy is in conversational styles. We all know that they vary from person to person. Some people attend to details. Others think it's a waste of time. Some people think directness is more honorable in a conversation. Others say indirectness is more polite. So let's be conscious of different people's conversational skills. Most of us are absorbed in our respective worlds. Empathy can bridge those worlds and give us a glimpse into the other person's world. Extending empathy may be one of the kindest gifts we can give someone. Sorry, my mouth is a little dry. Another reason it's important to listen, and this comes from a little different perspective, is it's a good discipline for the heart and the mind of the listener. A quote from Stephen Foster says, "Most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply." So active listening, not thinking of the next thing we're going to say, not overhearing or being focused on the conversation going on next to us, but intentionally blocking these things out and staying focused on the listener and what they're saying. It quiets the heart of the one talking because they know they have your attention, but it also quiets the heart of the listener too if you focus in and you aren't hearing everything that goes on around you. Some conversations, if controversial in nature, can cause the listener to feel anxious, or it can bring reactions. So we need to be aware of that also. It can cause us as a listener to check out. It takes discipline to avoid these defensive reactions like blaming or avoiding, dominating conversations. It also takes discipline to hear the other person out. It takes discipline to, rather than responding negatively, to invite the person to say more. Practice can help. If conversations with certain people or in certain situations with different specific subjects, if it brings reactions, practice. If you know that that's going to happen, practice. It may feel a little awkward at first, honestly, in front of the mirror, but it's a better trade-off than reacting negatively to a person. Another discipline is humor, and this is a little different angle since humor can actually be a negative if it's used to distract or defer or something like that. But if it's used intentionally, well-timed humor can actually work as it can diffuse tension. And laughing together, if it's something funny and we can laugh together, it builds connection. So for all of you that know my husband, you know he has a great sense of humor. It's probably actually the best, I think. And it's gotten him in trouble a time or two, but honestly, mostly I've seen him use it in really well-timed ways. And I think it's a gift that he has. So if it's used, that's a discipline as well, because we have to use it in the right way. But if used in the right way, I think it's it can be a very good thing. So what are the barriers to good listening? So the first one I have reminds me of a conversation that we had at lunch. And the first one I have is interrupting. And so I'm not sure where Tanya, and I keep wanting to call her Tanya Tucker. Tanya Taylor. I think I'll let her take over now. So we talked about interrupting, and they didn't even know I was going to talk about that. So I will go on, but I'm going to reference a little bit what she said. So in conversation, always be willing to listen first. It's easy to want to give our thoughts and our experiences and our advice, and sometimes we interrupt because it seems that important. Often what we have to say is fine and maybe even important, but interrupting it always fails to acknowledge the value of the person speaking. If you catch yourself interrupting, acknowledge it and allow them to go on. This is a quote from Larry King. "I remind myself every morning, nothing I say today will teach me anything, so if I'm going to learn, I must learn it by listening." So the little thing I'm going to put in about Tanya, she and I think it might have been you, Rini, was saying that she and, sorry, your husband's name, Dean, are the best at interrupting each other. And like, if you listen to their conversation, it is so intriguing because they actually do, but it's a way of relating for you, right? And so I actually thought of that as I was as I was studying the interrupting part, but then I was like, I don't think I'll go into that. But it's actually a really valid point that sometimes in some cultural backgrounds, it actually is kind of a dance, and it's a neat way of relating. So listen to them sometime this weekend if you get a chance. The next one I have is distractions. Devices are designed to be more alluring than anyone in our family, any of our friends, or the little talkative neighbor down the street. It's best to keep them, the devices, out of our line of sight in a conversation. There's times like when we do need them, work-related or other specific reasons, but I think it's really courteous to the one you're talking to if you comment about that or specify that that is why you have it, because they are really distracting. And it's easy, even, you think you're not going to be distracted by them, but it's so easy too. And then also our children can be distracting sometimes. Every once in a while they can misbehave. And I know from experience it can be distracting to know how to interrupt a conversation, to attend to them. And children are children, so I think we all have grace for that. So even if you have to excuse yourself from a serious conversation, that's okay. I have a friend that I've learned a lot from in that, who she almost always circles back, and it can be hours later, and usually via text, and she will circle back and finish the conversation, and I really like that. Another barrier can be assumptions or biases. When we assume we know what someone is going to say, it allows us to not have to listen. A good listener keeps an open mind. As I mentioned earlier, different conversational styles, they differ from each other. There's also culture and background that make a difference in the way we communicate. So also, the fourth one I have is emotional intolerance is another barrier. So this one we're going to go off subject just a little bit and talk about the gift of feelings. How do I view feelings and emotions? Am I comfortable with them, or do I shut them down? Do I shut down emotionally when they are expressed? If I'm uncomfortable with emotions, why? So these questions aren't life or death, and they don't have to be asked, and they don't have to be answered. But being curious about these things and asking ourselves these questions can help us better connect and walk with people who come to us and ask questions of how to deal with things that they are facing, and they want to dig into why they do the things they do, and why they feel the things they do. So it often hurts from our past can cause us to be intolerant of hearing others' emotions. It can stir feelings in us that are uncomfortable and that are hard to understand. So we slip into a survival mode of blocking out and controlling what makes us feel uncomfortable and anxious. Chip Dodd, in his book, The Voice of the Heart, says, each of us has received woundings, whether from a good home or an impaired home. If we find healing and understanding in these woundings through the heart, they will help us grow and prepare us for what we were made to accomplish. And how this relates to the subject of listening is knowing our own hearts. We can have the emotional capacity to listen to and care for the hearts of those around us. Feelings themselves are good, and they're a gift from God. It's my behavior or planned behavior that is either bad or good. So the last one is ways to be an active listener. Listening well is often silent, but never passive. Care for and focus on the person. Be fully present. Be curious. Ask good questions. Don't make the mistake of being more focused on being a good listener than on being interested in the person. Hold space for silence. Get comfortable with silence. And that's one I struggle with. It can help the speaker know you aren't anxious or impatient. And the last one I have is respond gently, not judgmentally. So as we close this session, I'll leave you with a few quotes. And by now, you've probably figured out I kind of like quotes. But I'll leave you with a few to think on. The partner who listens is rarer than the one who speaks. Wisdom is the reward you get for a lifetime of listening when you'd have preferred talking. Speak in such a way that others like to listen to you. Listen in such a way that others love to talk to you. So now, thank you for listening. And blessings to all of you.